The sun was setting over New York City as Eric Dawson boarded the plane, his carry-on bag slung over one shoulder. He had been traveling for work all week and was eager to get back home to Los Angeles. This flight wasn't just another routine trip for him. It was a chance to relax after days of meetings and presentations. Eric was a man who stood out in any crowd. With his neatly trimmed beard, confident posture, and sharp suits, people often mistook him for someone important. But what truly set him apart was his passion for fairness and equality. As an aviator and advocate for social causes, Eric never shied away from speaking his mind. He settled into his seat in first class, glancing around at the other passengers. The cabin was quiet, save for the hum of soft conversations and the occasional rustle of magazines being flipped open. Across the aisle, a man in his late 50s sat with an air of authority. His name was Richard Leavitt, though Eric didn't know that yet. Leavitt wore an expensive suit, his tie perfectly knotted, and carried himself like someone used to commanding attention. Beside Eric, a woman named Laura Bennett sat calmly, her nose buried in a thick book about historical leaders. She seemed uninterested in the world around her, but there was something about the way she occasionally glanced up that suggested she was more observant than she let on. As the plane taxied down the runway, the captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming everyone aboard and giving the usual safety reminders. Eric leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes for a moment. He hoped this flight would be peaceful. Little did he know, it would turn into anything but. It started when the plane reached cruising altitude and the attendants began serving drinks. Leavitt ordered a scotch and leaned back in his chair, loosening his tie. After taking a sip, he turned slightly toward Laura and said, "You ever wonder how we got to where we are today? Politically, I mean." Laura lowered her book just enough to look at him. "That depends on your perspective," she replied coolly. Leavitt chuckled. "Fair point. Take Daniel Crockett, for example. Love him or hate him, he's making waves." Eric's ears perked up at the mention of Crockett's name. Senator Daniel Crockett was a divisive figure, known for pushing policies that many considered extreme. To some, he was a champion of progress. To others, a reckless ideologue. Eric fell firmly in the latter camp. He couldn't resist chiming in. "Making waves?" Eric asked, leaning forward so both Leavitt and Laura could see him. "Is that what you call stripping away protections for vulnerable communities?" Leavitt raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by the challenge. "I'd call it streamlining bureaucracy. Sometimes sacrifices need to be made for the greater good." "The greater good?" Eric repeated, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Or the benefit of a select few?" Laura watched silently as the two men locked eyes. There was no hostility in their expressions, yet, but the tension was palpable. Passengers nearby pretended not to listen, though it was obvious they were curious about where this conversation might lead. Leavitt took another sip of his drink before responding. "Look, change is uncomfortable, always has been. But if we don't push boundaries, nothing will improve." "And whose definition of improvement are we talking about?" Eric shot back. "Because from where I'm sitting, Crockett's policies only serve those already in power." Leavitt smirked, clearly enjoying the debate. "Maybe, or maybe you're too blinded by ideology to see the bigger picture." Eric bristled at the comment. He prided himself on seeing things clearly, on fighting for justice even when it was unpopular. "Ideology? No, my stance is based on facts. Facts about inequality, exploitation, and corruption." Laura finally decided to join the conversation. Setting her book aside, she looked at both men thoughtfully. "Both of you seem convinced you're right," she said evenly. "But arguing won't solve anything. Maybe there's a middle ground neither of you is considering." Her words hung in the air for a moment, breaking the rhythm of the argument. Eric frowned, unsure whether to feel annoyed or grateful for her interruption. Leavitt, however, seemed unfazed. "Middle ground? In politics? Good luck finding that these days." Before anyone could respond, the plane hit a patch of turbulence. The sudden jolt caused drinks to spill and passengers to grip their armrests. A collective gasp filled the cabin as the aircraft rocked violently. For several long seconds, the world outside the windows was nothing but clouds whipping past at dizzying speeds. When the turbulence subsided, the pilot's voice came over the intercom again, assuring everyone they were safe. Passengers exhaled in relief, but Eric noticed something strange. During the chaos, Leavitt's briefcase had fallen open slightly, revealing a stack of papers inside. One page caught Eric's eye, a document labeled Project Phoenix. It was upside down, but the bold font and official-looking seal made it impossible to ignore. Curiosity tugged at him. What was Project Phoenix? And why did it seem so important to Leavitt? Eric's instincts told him to investigate further, but he forced himself to stay seated. Now wasn't the time. Still, the image lingered in his mind, gnawing at him as the plane continued its journey westward. For the next hour, the atmosphere in first class remained tense. Leavitt returned to sipping his drink, occasionally glancing at Eric with a mixture of amusement and suspicion. Laura resumed reading her book, though Eric noticed her fingers tracing the same line of text repeatedly. Clearly, she was distracted, too. Despite the lull in conversation, Eric couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was unfolding. The argument with Leavitt had been more than just a clash of ideologies. It felt personal, almost rehearsed, and then there was Laura, whose neutral demeanor masked a depth Eric couldn't quite decipher. Was she merely an innocent bystander caught in the crossfire, or did she have her own agenda? As the hours passed and the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the cabin in shades of orange and purple, Eric found himself growing increasingly uneasy. He didn't know it yet, but this flight was about to take a turn that would challenge everything he believed in and force him to make choices he never anticipated. For now, though, all he could do was wait. The tension in the first-class cabin lingered long after the turbulence had passed. Eric Dawson sat quietly, his mind racing as he replayed the earlier argument with Richard Leavitt. The man's words still echoed in his ears. Maybe you're too blinded by ideology to see the bigger picture. Eric couldn't decide whether Leavitt was deliberately provoking him or simply enjoying the debate. Either way, it left a bitter taste in his mouth. Across the aisle, Leavitt seemed unfazed, scrolling through emails on his phone while occasionally sipping his scotch. His calm demeanor only fueled Eric's frustration. How could someone so dismissive of others' suffering appear so composed? Eric wanted to keep arguing, to make Leavitt understand the harm caused by people like Senator Crockett, but he knew it wouldn't change anything. People like Leavitt rarely listened. Laura Bennett, meanwhile, had returned to her book, though her focus seemed half-hearted. Every now and then, she glanced up, her eyes darting between Eric and Leavitt as if trying to piece together some invisible puzzle. Her presence intrigued Eric. She hadn't taken sides during their heated exchange, yet her comments hinted at a deeper understanding of the issues at hand. Who was she, really? The flight attendants moved silently down the aisles, offering snacks and drinks to passengers. When one approached Eric, he declined politely, his appetite gone. He noticed Laura accepting a cup of tea, her hands steady despite the earlier turbulence. Something about her composure struck him as unusual. Most people would have been rattled by the sudden jolt, but Laura seemed almost prepared. As the minutes ticked by, Eric found himself staring out the window, watching the endless expanse of clouds drift past. His thoughts kept circling back to the document he'd glimpsed in Leavitt's briefcase, Project Phoenix. The name sounded ominous, like something out of a spy movie. What could it mean? And why did Leavitt carry such papers with him on a commercial flight? Unable to resist his curiosity any longer, Eric decided to act. As soon as Leavitt excused himself to use the restroom, Eric saw his chance. Pretending to stretch his legs, he casually walked over to the seat across the aisle. Leavitt's briefcase was still partially open, the corner of the document peeking out. Glancing around to ensure no one was watching, Eric leaned down and carefully flipped through the pages. What he discovered shocked him. Project Phoenix wasn't just some corporate initiative or government report. It was a detailed plan for widespread surveillance and manipulation of public opinion. The document outlined strategies for monitoring online activity, influencing media narratives, and even targeting specific individuals deemed threats to certain interests. Worse still, it mentioned Senator Daniel Crockett multiple times, linking him directly to the project. Eric's heart raced as he skimmed the pages. This was bigger than he'd imagined, a conspiracy involving high-profile politicians and powerful organizations. It explained so much: the divisive rhetoric, the erosion of privacy rights, the growing distrust in institutions. But before he could process everything, he heard footsteps approaching. Panicking, Eric quickly shoved the documents back into the briefcase and hurriedly returned to his seat. Back in place, he tried to appear nonchalant, picking up a magazine to hide his trembling hands. Leavitt reappeared moments later, settling back into his seat without noticing anything amiss. Eric let out a shaky breath, his mind spinning. How could he expose this? Who could he trust? Before he could think further, Laura leaned closer to him. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered urgently, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. Startled, Eric turned to face her. "What are you talking about?" Laura's expression was serious. Her eyes locked onto his. "I saw you looking through his briefcase. Whatever you found, it's dangerous." "How do you know about—" Eric began, but Laura cut him off. "I've been keeping an eye on Leavitt for weeks," she admitted. "He's involved in things most people can't even imagine. You don't want to get tangled up in this." Eric stared at her, stunned. "So you're saying I should just ignore it? Let him walk away with whatever this is?" "It's not that simple," Laura replied. "There are layers to this story, things you don't understand. If you act rashly, you'll put yourself, and others, in danger." Her words gave Eric pause. He wanted to believe she was exaggerating, but there was a sincerity in her tone that made him hesitate. Still, how could he sit idly by knowing what he now knew? Leavitt interrupted their whispered conversation by clearing his throat loudly. Both Eric and Laura looked up to find him watching them, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Something interesting going on here?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "No," Eric replied quickly, forcing a smile. "Just chatting." Leavitt didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press the matter. Instead, he reached for his briefcase and began organizing its contents, ensuring everything was securely tucked away. Eric couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in his demeanor. More alert, more guarded. Had he suspected something, the rest of the flight grew increasingly tense. Eric couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, not just by Leavitt but also by Laura. She remained quiet after their brief exchange, her focus once again on her book, though Eric doubted. She was actually reading. Every so often she would glance at him, her expression unreadable. Meanwhile, Leavitt appeared to be testing Eric, dropping casual remarks about politics and ethics. "It's funny," he said at one point, addressing no one in particular. "People always think they know what's best for everyone else. But when push comes to shove, they're usually wrong." Eric clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to respond. He didn't trust himself to speak without revealing his emotions. Instead, he focused on formulating a plan. There had to be a way to expose Project Phoenix without putting himself or anyone else at risk. But what? As the hours dragged on, the plane began its descent toward Los Angeles. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, announcing their arrival and thanking passengers for flying. Outside the windows, the city lights sparkled like stars against the dark horizon. Eric felt a mix of relief and dread. On one hand, the flight was nearly over, and he could finally step away from the suffocating atmosphere of first class. On the other hand, he knew the real challenge was just beginning. When the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, Eric unbuckled his seatbelt and grabbed his bag. As he stood up, Laura caught his arm gently. "Be careful," she said softly. "This isn't something you can handle alone." Her warning lingered in his mind as he stepped off the plane and into the bustling terminal. For the first time in years, Eric felt truly uncertain about what to do next. The truth was out there, hidden within those documents, but exposing it meant navigating a web of secrets and lies far beyond anything he'd ever encountered. Little did he know the choices he was about to make would set off a chain reaction that would change everything, for better or worse. The Los Angeles airport buzzed with activity as passengers disembarked from the plane. Eric Dawson walked briskly toward the terminal, his mind still racing from everything he'd learned during the flight. The weight of the secret pressed heavily on him, making it hard to focus on anything else. He couldn't shake the image of the documents in Leavitt's briefcase, Project Phoenix, and the implications they carried. This wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about power, control, and manipulation on a massive scale. Behind him, Laura Bennett followed at a slower pace, her steps deliberate but unhurried. She seemed to be keeping an eye on Eric without appearing too obvious. Every few moments, she glanced around the crowded terminal, scanning faces as if searching for someone, or perhaps ensuring no one was watching them. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Eric's growing anxiety. While he wrestled with what to do next, Laura appeared to have already made up her mind about something. As they reached the baggage claim area, Eric finally turned to face her. "You said you've been tracking Leavitt," he began, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "What exactly does that mean?" Laura hesitated before answering. "I work for an independent group that investigates corruption," she explained, carefully. "We look into things governments and corporations try to keep hidden. Leavitt is one of our targets." Eric frowned, trying to process her words. "So you're some kind of investigator? Why didn't you say anything earlier?" "I had my reasons," Laura replied evenly. "For now, let's just say I'm here because I believe Project Phoenix is dangerous, and based on what I saw back there, you agree." Eric nodded slowly. "Yeah, I do, but how deep does this go? What are we dealing with here?" "That's what I've been trying to figure out," Laura admitted. "Leavitt isn't just some businessman dabbling in shady deals. He's connected to politicians, lobbyists, even intelligence agencies. If Project Phoenix is real, it's bigger than any of us." Her words sent a chill down Eric's spine. For all his passion for justice, he'd never faced anything like this before. Exposing corruption usually meant writing articles, organizing, protests, or lobbying lawmakers. This was different. This felt personal, dangerous. Before Eric could ask more questions, a commotion near the exit caught their attention. A group of men in dark suits stood clustered together, speaking urgently into earpieces. They weren't airport security. They looked like private agents, maybe even government operatives. One of them glanced in Eric and Laura's direction, his gaze lingering just long enough to make Eric uneasy. "Do you think they're here for Leavitt?" Eric whispered. "Possibly," Laura murmured. "Or maybe they're here for us." The thought hadn't occurred to Eric until that moment, but it made sense. If Leavitt suspected Eric had seen the documents, he might have alerted someone. Or worse, whoever was behind Project Phoenix could already know about the breach. Either way, staying visible wasn't a good idea. "We should split up," Laura suggested quietly. "Meet me at the coffee shop near Gate 12 in 20 minutes. If anyone follows you, lose them." Eric hesitated. Splitting up felt risky, especially since he barely knew Laura, but she seemed to know what she was doing and he didn't have a better plan. "Fine," he agreed reluctantly, "but don't disappear on me." With that, Laura turned and walked away, blending seamlessly into the crowd. Eric watched her go, feeling a mix of admiration and frustration. Admiration because she clearly knew how to handle herself in tense situations. Frustration because he hated not being in control. He decided to follow her advice and create some distance between himself and the suited men. Ducking into a nearby restroom, he waited a few minutes before exiting through a side door marked "Employees Only." The hallway beyond was dimly lit and deserted, giving him a chance to regroup. He checked his phone for messages but found nothing urgent, no calls, no texts, just silence. When he finally made his way to the coffee shop, Laura was already there, sitting at a corner table with a cup of tea in front of her. She gestured for him to sit, her expression serious. "Did anyone follow you?" she asked. "I don't think so," Eric replied, sliding into the seat across from her. "But those guys back there, who were they?" "Hard to say for sure," Laura admitted. "They could be working for Leavitt, or they could be part of whatever organization is running Project Phoenix. Either way, it means we're onto something big." "And now what?" Eric asked. How do we expose this without getting ourselves killed? Laura sighed, leaning back in her chair. That's the tricky part. We need proof. Something concrete that can't be dismissed as hearsay. Those documents in Leavitt's briefcase would be perfect, but getting access to them again won't be easy. Eric thought for a moment. What if I confront him directly? Force him to admit what he's involved in? No, Laura said firmly. You'll blow your cover, and then we'll lose any chance of gathering evidence. Besides, Leavitt isn't stupid. He'll deny everything and turn the tables on you. So what's the alternative? Eric demanded, his frustration boiling over. Just sit back and do nothing? No, Laura repeated, her tone softening slightly. We gather intel first. Find out where Project Phoenix originated, who's funding it, and how far it reaches. Once we have enough information, we can decide how to act. It sounded logical, but Eric couldn't help feeling impatient. Waiting wasn't his strong suit, especially when lives were potentially at stake. Still, he trusted Laura's judgment, if only because she seemed to know more about this world than he did. As they continued talking, Eric noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. Across the room, a man in a gray hoodie sat alone, nursing a cup of coffee. Something about him seemed off. Too casual, too still. When the man glanced in their direction, Eric quickly looked away. Do you see that guy over there? Eric whispered to Laura. She followed his gaze and nodded almost imperceptibly. Yeah, probably another watcher. Let's finish up and move somewhere less crowded. They left the coffee shop separately, taking different routes to avoid drawing attention. Eric wandered through the terminal, pretending to browse souvenir shops while keeping an eye out for anyone suspicious. Eventually, he met Laura outside by the parking garage, where she led him to a nondescript sedan parked in a shadowy corner. Get in, she instructed, unlocking the doors. We'll talk more once we're moving. Eric hesitated for a second, then climbed into the passenger seat. As they pulled out of the garage and merged onto the freeway, the reality of the situation hit him harder than ever. He was in over, his head embroiled in a conspiracy that stretched far beyond anything he'd imagined. Yet instead of feeling overwhelmed, he felt oddly determined. If Project Phoenix was as dangerous as it seemed, then exposing it wasn't just important, it was necessary. For the first time in hours, Eric allowed himself a small smile. Whatever lay ahead, he wouldn't face it alone. The sedan sped along the freeway, its headlights cutting through the Los Angeles night. Eric Dawson sat in the passenger seat, his mind a whirlwind of questions and possibilities. Beside him, Laura Bennett drove with calm precision, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. The hum of the engine and the rhythmic sound of tires against asphalt filled the silence between them. Neither spoke for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Eric broke the quiet. So what's the plan? He asked, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. We can't just drive around forever. Laura glanced at him briefly before returning her focus to the road. First, we need a safe place to regroup, somewhere off the grid where we won't be found easily. And then, Eric pressed. What happens after that? Then, Laura said, her tone measured, we figure out our next move. We need more information about Project Phoenix, where it started, who's pulling the strings, and how far it reaches. Without solid evidence, we're just two people making wild accusations. Eric nodded, understanding the logic behind her words. But patience wasn't his strong suit, especially when the stakes were so high. How do we get that information? Leavitt isn't going to hand it over willingly. No, he won't, Laura agreed. But there are ways to track down leads. Documents leave trails, emails, phone calls, meetings. If we dig deep enough, we'll find something we can use. Eric leaned back in his seat, staring out the window. As the city lights blurred past, he felt a mix of determination and unease. On one hand, he was ready to take action, to fight for justice no matter the cost. On the other hand, he couldn't ignore the risks they were facing. People involved in conspiracies like this didn't play fair. If they got caught, the consequences could be severe. After driving for nearly an hour, Laura pulled into the parking lot of a small motel tucked away in a quieter part of town. It wasn't luxurious, but it was discreet, a place where nobody would think to look for them. She parked the car under a flickering street lamp and turned off the engine. "This will work for now," she said, grabbing a backpack from the backseat. "Let's check in and get settled." Inside the motel office, the clerk barely looked up as they approached the counter. He handed them a key without asking questions, his attention focused on the TV mounted in the corner. Eric followed Laura to their room, a modest space with 2 beds, a small table, and a bathroom. It wasn't much, but it would do. Once inside, Laura locked the door and drew the curtains tightly shut. She set her backpack on the table and began unpacking a laptop and a few other gadgets. Eric watched curiously as she powered up the computer and connected it to a portable Wi-Fi hotspot. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Setting up secure communications," she explained. "If anyone's monitoring us, I don't want them tracing our activity. This way, we can research safely." Eric nodded, impressed by her preparedness. "You've done this kind of thing before, haven't you?" Laura hesitated, her fingers pausing on the keyboard. "Not exactly like this, but yes, I've worked on investigations before. You learn to cover your tracks." As the laptop booted up, Eric paced the room, his mind racing. "Okay, so where do we start? What's step 1? Laura opened a browser and navigated to a search engine. "Step 1 is finding connections. We know Leavitt is tied to Project Phoenix, and we know Crockett is mentioned in the documents. That gives us a starting point. Let's see if we can link them to anyone else, or any organization." For the next hour, they scoured the internet for clues. Laura typed furiously while Eric read aloud anything relevant he found. They uncovered news articles about Leavitt's business dealings, profiles of politicians associated with Senator Crockett, and reports of government contracts awarded to shadowy firms. Each piece of information added another layer to the puzzle, but nothing concrete emerged. Frustrated, Eric slammed his fist lightly on the table. "This isn't working. We're chasing shadows here." "We're close," Laura insisted, her voice calm but firm. "These things take time. Keep digging." Just as Eric was about to respond, the laptop screen flashed with a notification. An encrypted message had arrived, addressed to Laura. She frowned as she opened it, reading silently for a moment before turning to Eric. "It's from my team," she said. "They've been tracking Leavitt too. Apparently he has a meeting tomorrow morning at a private club downtown. High-profile attendees only." Eric's eyes widened. "That could be our chance. If we can get inside, maybe we'll overhear something useful." "It's risky," Laura warned. "Security will be tight and we don't have invitations." "I'm used to taking risks," Eric replied. "Besides, we don't have many options left. What's the worst that could happen?" Laura shot him a look. "Don't say that. Things can always go wrong." Despite her caution, she agreed to come up with a plan. Using the resources at her disposal, she forged fake IDs and membership cards that would allow them access to the club. Meanwhile, Eric studied photos of the venue online, memorizing its layout and identifying potential escape routes. By the time they finished preparing, it was late. Exhaustion crept over Eric, but his nerves kept him alert. As he lay down on one of the beds, he replayed the day's events in his mind. From the tense argument on the plane to discovering Project Phoenix to fleeing the airport, everything felt surreal. Yet somehow it also felt inevitable, as though he'd been leading up to this moment all along. Laura sat at the table, still reviewing files on her laptop. "Try to get some rest," she said without looking up. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Eric closed his eyes, grateful for her presence. Despite the danger they faced, he felt a strange sense of camaraderie with Laura. They were an unlikely pair. He, the passionate aviator with a love for justice, and she, the methodical investigator with secrets of her own. Together, they made a formidable team. As sleep finally claimed him, Eric dreamed of hidden rooms and whispered conversations. In his dream, he stood at the edge of a vast labyrinth, its walls lined with documents labeled Project Phoenix. Each step forward revealed new truths, but the deeper he went, the darker the maze became. Just as he reached for a final document, a voice echoed behind him. "You shouldn't have come here." He woke with a start, heart pounding. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Laura was asleep on the other bed, her breathing slow and steady. For a moment, Eric wondered if he should wake her, tell her about the dream, but he decided against it. Whatever awaited them at the club tomorrow, they would face it together. The morning sun filtered through the thin motel curtains as Eric Dawson woke up, his body stiff from the unfamiliar bed. He glanced at the clock on the bedside table. It was just past 6. Laura was already awake, sitting at the small table, with her laptop open and a cup of coffee in hand. She looked focused, her eyes scanning lines of text on the screen. "Morning," she said without looking up. "I've been going over the details for today. The club opens at 8, but we should get there early to avoid drawing attention." Eric sat up, rubbing his face. "You're really calm about this," he remarked. "Aren't you worried?" Laura shrugged. "Being calm keeps me alive. Worrying doesn't change anything, it just clouds your judgment." Her answer didn't surprise Eric. Laura had proven herself to be practical and methodical, qualities that balanced out his own impulsive nature. Still, he couldn't help feeling nervous. They were about to walk into a den of powerful people, armed only with fake IDs and a vague hope of uncovering something useful. If they got caught, things could go very wrong. After grabbing quick showers and changing into clothes that matched their forged personas, business attire for both, they double-checked their gear. Laura tucked a tiny recording device into her jacket pocket, while Eric slipped a pen-sized camera into his breast pocket. Both items were subtle enough not to raise suspicion, but advanced enough to capture critical moments. By 7:30, they were back in the sedan, heading toward downtown Los Angeles. The private club where Leavitt's meeting was taking place occupied the top floor of a sleek skyscraper. From the outside, it looked like any other high-end building, its glass facade reflecting the cityscape. But Eric knew better. Behind those polished windows lay secrets that could shake the foundations of power. When they arrived, Laura parked a block away to avoid standing out. Together, they walked briskly to the entrance, blending in with other professionals arriving for work or meetings. At the front desk, a stern-looking receptionist greeted them with polite indifference. "Names?" she asked, glancing between them. "Laura Bennett and Eric Dawson." Laura replied smoothly, handing over their fake membership cards. The receptionist scanned them briefly before nodding and directing them to the elevator bank. Inside the elevator, Eric fidgeted nervously, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time. "Do you think she bought it?" he whispered. "She did," Laura assured him. "Now stop fidgeting. Act natural." The ride to the top floor felt endless. When the doors finally opened, they stepped into a luxurious lounge area adorned with plush furniture and modern art. Waitstaff moved quietly among the guests, offering drinks and hors d'oeuvres. Conversations buzzed softly around them, punctuated by occasional laughter. Leavitt stood near the bar, deep in conversation with 2 men Eric didn't recognize. His suit was impeccable, his posture commanding. As Eric watched, Leavitt gestured animatedly, clearly passionate about whatever topic he was discussing. Eric felt a surge of anger. He hated how confident Leavitt seemed, knowing what kind of schemes he was involved in. "We need to split up," Laura murmured. "You circle around and try to overhear anything useful. I'll stick closer to Leavitt. Keep your distance unless absolutely necessary." Eric nodded and moved off, pretending to admire a painting on the wall while keeping an ear tuned to nearby conversations. Most of what he heard was mundane business talk, investment opportunities, real estate deals. But occasionally, snippets of more sinister discussions reached him. One group of men spoke in hushed tones about public sentiment and controlling narratives. Another mentioned Phoenix milestones and Phase 2 implementation. Each phrase sent a jolt of adrenaline through Eric, confirming that Project Phoenix was indeed tied to this gathering. Meanwhile, Laura edged closer to Leavitt, careful not to draw his attention. She positioned herself near a table displaying gourmet snacks, casually picking at a plate of fruit while eavesdropping. Leavitt's voice carried slightly above the hum of chatter. "The timeline is tight," he said, addressing one of his companions. Crockett wants results before the next election cycle. Any delays will reflect poorly on all of us. His companion nodded grimly. We're pushing hard, but some of these initiatives are harder to push through than anticipated. Public resistance is stronger than expected, Leavitt smirked. Public resistance can be managed. That's why we have teams working on messaging. People believe what they're told to believe. Laura clenched her jaw, resisting the urge to confront him right then and there. Instead, she activated her recording device, ensuring every word was captured. On the other side of the room, Eric noticed a woman typing furiously on a tablet. She wore a lanyard identifying her as part of the event staff, but something about her demeanor struck him as unusual. Her movements were too deliberate, her focus too intense. Intrigued, he drifted closer under the pretense of admiring another piece of artwork. As he passed behind her, he caught a glimpse of the screen, a document titled Phase 2 Rollout Plan. It listed dates, locations, and strategies for implementing various aspects of Project Phoenix. Heart racing, Eric discreetly activated his pen camera, capturing images of the document. Just as he finished, the woman turned suddenly, catching him in her peripheral vision. For a split second, their eyes met. Panic surged through Eric, but instead of calling him out, she simply smiled politely and continued typing. He exhaled sharply, realizing she probably assumed he was just another guest milling around. Back near the bar, Laura signaled subtly for Eric to join her. Once he was close enough, she whispered, "We've got enough, let's leave before anyone notices." They made their way to the exit, trying to appear casual despite the adrenaline coursing through them. Outside, they hurried to the car, eager to put distance between themselves and the club. Once inside the sedan, Laura turned to Eric. "What did you find?" "I got photos of a document detailing parts of Project Phoenix," he said excitedly. "It lists specific plans and timelines. What about you?" "I recorded Leavitt talking about manipulating public opinion and tying everything to Crockett," Laura replied. "This is solid evidence. Now we just need to figure out how to use it." As they drove back to the motel, Eric allowed himself a moment of quiet triumph. They had done it. They had infiltrated a secretive meeting and walked away with proof of wrongdoing. But even as he celebrated, he knew the hardest part was yet to come. Exposing Project Phoenix wouldn't be easy, especially when its architects wielded so much influence. Still, for the first time since discovering the conspiracy, Eric felt hopeful. With Laura by his side, he believed they could make a difference, even if it meant risking everything. Back at the motel, Eric Dawson and Laura Bennett huddled around the small table, their faces illuminated by the glow of her laptop. The evidence they had gathered, the photos of the document Eric captured, and the audio recording Laura made, was now spread out before them. It was enough to paint a damning picture of Project Phoenix, but they both knew that exposing it wouldn't be as simple as handing over files to the media or posting them online. Laura leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "This is big," she said, her voice low but steady. "If we release this without thinking it through, we risk losing control of how it's used, or worse, getting silenced before anyone sees it." Eric nodded, his earlier excitement tempered by the weight of what they were dealing with. "So what do you suggest? We can't just sit on this forever." "No," Laura agreed, "but we need allies, people who can help us amplify the message while protecting ourselves. I have contacts in investigative journalism and advocacy groups. If we work together, we might stand a chance." While Laura began drafting emails to trusted colleagues, Eric reviewed the photos he'd taken. Each page of the document revealed more details about Project Phoenix, timelines for implementing surveillance systems, strategies for influencing elections, and even names of key players involved. He felt a mix of anger and disbelief. How could something like this exist unchecked? As Laura typed, her phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up, glancing at the screen. Her expression shifted slightly, a flicker of concern crossing her face. "It's from my team," she said, opening the message. "They've been monitoring Leavitt's movements. Apparently he knows someone's onto him." Eric's stomach tightened. "How?" They don't know yet, Laura admitted. But he's been making calls, moving assets, and tightening security around his operations. He's expecting trouble. Then we're running out of time, Eric said firmly. We need to act fast before he covers his tracks. Laura didn't argue. Instead, she forwarded the evidence to her network, attaching detailed instructions for verifying its authenticity. I'm telling them to hold off until we give the signal, she explained. Once everything is ready, we'll coordinate a simultaneous release across multiple platforms. For the next hour, they worked tirelessly, refining their strategy and preparing for the fallout. They knew the moment the story broke, chaos would ensue. People would demand answers, governments would scramble to contain the damage, and those implicated would fight back fiercely. But Eric and Laura also knew that silence wasn't an option, not when so much was at stake. Finally, as dawn approached, they sat back, exhausted but resolute. This is it, Laura said quietly. Once we push forward, there's no turning back. I know, Eric replied. But if we don't do this, who will? With that, Laura sent the final email instructing her contacts to publish the evidence within 24 hours. As soon as the message went out, a wave of relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. Almost immediately, her phone rang again. This time it was a call, not a text. She answered hesitantly, putting it on speaker so Eric could hear. What is it? She asked. It's Leavitt, came the voice on the other end. Calm, measured, and unmistakably smug. You didn't think I'd let you walk away without consequences, did you? Eric froze, his heart pounding. Beside him, Laura remained composed, though her knuckles whitened as she gripped the phone. What do you want? She asked coolly. Offer you a deal, Leavitt replied. Project Phoenix isn't what you think it is. Yes, it involves surveillance and influence campaigns, but it's designed to protect national interests, not destroy them. You expose this recklessly, and innocent people will suffer. That's your version of the truth, Laura shot back. Your national interests are just code for greed and corruption. Leavitt chuckled softly. Call it what you want. But here's the thing. You're not the only ones watching me. My organization has eyes everywhere. If you go public, I'll make sure everyone involved regrets it, including your sources. The threat hung heavy in the air. Eric clenched his fists, wanting nothing more than to shout into the phone, but Laura gestured for him to stay quiet. We're not afraid of you, she said evenly. And we won't stop until the truth comes out. There was a pause on the other end. When Leavitt spoke again, his tone had hardened. Suit yourself. But remember, you brought this on yourselves. The line went dead. For a long moment, neither Eric nor Laura moved. The room felt suffocating, the gravity of their situation pressing down on them. What now? Eric asked finally. We stick to the plan, Laura said, her voice firm despite the tension in her eyes. He's bluffing, or trying to scare us off. Either way, backing down isn't an option. Eric nodded, drawing strength from her resolve. All right, let's finish this. Over the next several hours, they prepared for the inevitable storm. Laura reached out to legal advisors, setting up contingency plans in case they were targeted. Eric drafted a statement explaining why they were exposing Project Phoenix, emphasizing the importance of transparency and accountability. By the time evening rolled around, everything was in place. When the first article hit the internet, it spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed about government conspiracies and corporate manipulation. Social media erupted with outrage, disbelief, and calls for justice. Within minutes, major news outlets picked up the story, amplifying the impact exponentially. Eric watched the coverage unfold on his laptop, a mix of pride and anxiety swirling inside him. Do you think it's enough? He asked Laura. It's a start, she replied. But the real battle begins now. Those implicated won't go down without a fight. True to her words, the backlash was swift. Politicians denied involvement, corporations issued vague statements, and anonymous commentators dismissed the evidence as fake. Meanwhile, reports surfaced claiming Eric and Laura were rogue activists fabricating lies for personal gain. Despite the smear campaign, Public pressure mounted. Protesters took to the streets demanding investigations and reforms. Lawmakers called for hearings, and watchdog organizations launched probes into the allegations. Slowly but surely, cracks began to form in the walls of secrecy surrounding Project Phoenix. As days turned into weeks, Eric found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. The journey had been grueling, filled with moments of doubt and fear. Yet through it all, he had discovered something unexpected: courage. Standing up for what was right, even when the odds seemed insurmountable, had changed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Laura, too, had left an indelible mark on him. Her calm determination and unwavering commitment to justice inspired him to keep fighting, no matter how hard things got. Though their paths might diverge after this, Eric knew he would never forget the bond they had formed. One afternoon, as they packed up their belongings to leave the motel, Laura turned to him with a faint smile. "This isn't the end," she said. "There's still so much work to do." "I know," Eric replied. "But for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful." And with that, they stepped outside, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.